And good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from Kampala, Uganda. I hope you can all hear me well. And thank you for this opportunity to share a bit about our work and what we've done, and also just show you how AI can be used not only to advance economic development, but also social and impact use cases as well. I'm quickly sharing my screen. I hope you can all see it well. Do let me know if that's not the case. All right, great. So my name is Rositsa Zaimova, and I'm a co-founder and partner at Dalberg Data Insights. In the next few minutes, I'm going to quickly share a bit about who we are, and I will focus mostly on how we use data and kind of the power of big data to fill data gaps in data scarce environments, which, most of our work is actually in the global south, East Africa and West Africa. So I'm happy to kind of also bring a new theme here and share slightly two examples actually from our work. One that is from Uganda, where I'm currently based, and one from Belgium, just to show that we can think about applications of big data in a much broader and bigger sense than solely impact, basically driving economic outcomes. So a bit about us. Who is Dalberg Data Insights? Dalberg Data Insights is today the big data entity of the Dalberg Group. And Dalberg is a strategy consulting firm focused on international development topics. We have about 24 locations today, as you can see, based all over the world, with quite big presence in Africa, just because we are focusing on social development topics, working on poverty alleviation, working on gender equality, working on access to finance, on agriculture, and all of that in the intersection between digital, AI, technology, and basically the topics that I mentioned. We are a group of, again, data scientists, designers, strategists that are there together to solve some of these biggest challenges, coming in from a different lens, because we've realized that some of those big problems that I mentioned today cannot be just solved with AI, especially not in data scarce environments. You need to be able to look at it from kind of a human-centered design perspective, truly understand the issues, design the strategies around them, and of course, bring not only traditional but non-traditional data sources to be able to solve some of these challenges. And we at Dalberg Data Insights, I founded the company about 5-6 years ago. We've been working in the global south with governments, with UN foundations, UN agencies, some of the big foundations, as I mentioned, on solving some of these big challenges. And we've realized that just AI and data and technology cannot necessarily answer and solve, poverty, for example, or gender inequality or financial inclusion in the poorest environments. What we need to do is look at the data and AI space from an ecosystem perspective and look at how does that relate to data governance. Do we have the right data governance mechanisms to make sure that the technical tools that we are building actually, have the right protocols, mechanisms to be able to work in environments where technology and technology adoption is still very nascent. And next to data governance and technological tools and AI products, what is really important is to also work on and understand the community of users, data holders, funders, because that's usually a much more complex ecosystem than working only with the private sector, simply because of scarcity of resources in the countries where we operate. That being said, I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes on sharing just 2 examples actually of how we've used the power of AI, the power of big data in solving some of the social challenges that I mentioned before. So our background comes from actually analyzing telecom data, for commercial purposes, basically working with telecom operators in the global south and helping them, let's say, optimize their capex, use the data to increase uptake and penetration of mobile money, et cetera, et cetera. And we realized slowly that telecom data is one of the really interesting data sources on the continent, that most people today have mobile phones, and the penetration and uptake of basically mobile technologies is increasing. And with that, the amount of data that can be used obviously by telecom operators to bring better products and services for their customers, but it can also be used to fill data gaps in very scarce data environments. So we started looking at that very interesting data source from a social perspective, and seeing what does that tell us. And when I talk about telecom data, I'm talking about basically something that is called call detail records. Every time you use your mobile phone, there is a let's say a line of code that is sent at cell tower level, that talks about actually your telecom data use, and that, when aggregated and anonymized, can be used to tell socioeconomic status. It can tell a lot about population movements. It can tell a lot about social networks, as well as usage of products here in the global south, such as solar energy, such as mobile money, which is the local way of basically paying, think of it as a bank, but all through mobile devices. And recently we worked on a project with one of the biggest NGOs in the world. Some of you probably have heard of it, called Give Directly. Give Directly has pioneered the universal basic income, mostly again starting here in East Africa, but they expanded and now they're operating also in the US, where they basically are identifying poorest communities and give them unconditional cash transfers on regular basis, and follow also the impact of their work. You can read a lot about it. There is a lot of research on the topic, and they're one of the big pioneers in the field. And how they usually do that in environments such as East Africa is they try to use census data being here collected once every 10 years, and identify the poorest communities like villages, and then go ahead and basically drop a lot of money, but to a small group of people, not a lot of money, but regular income for let's say selected community that is identified as poor. But as you see, that is a very capital intensive work and very costly to identify the poorest, because there is just no accurate data and up-to-date information on where these poor people are. Today, most people have mobile phones. If it is not one per person, at least it's one per household here in East Africa. So what we did is used already a research that exists. We applied it here in a very real situation. We partnered with the biggest telecom operator here in Uganda. We ran a survey of around 15,000 people to basically identify and use the already a survey tool called Poverty Probability Index that is well used all over the development space. We used that tool to basically collect information, phone survey for 15,000 people, and we combined that with the telecom data, which again is a very valuable data source. We estimated over 150 different indicators, and we correlated the telecom data with basically the phone survey data to build a poverty model that allowed us to basically roll it out to the full subscriber base and identify, not at individual level in this case, but at a community level, where are the poorest communities. We used about 20% of the training data, not to build the model, but to validate the model. And we reached a very, very high precision. That was actually, this model was used by Give Directly to be able to identify some of the most marginalized communities and prioritize those areas for further intervention. So that's one example of how we can use the power of big data and AI to actually advance the sustainable development goals and identify, in this case, the most marginalized groups of people. And one example maybe from Belgium. So I hope you will relate more to this one. And I know that this kind of use case was also done in Belgium, in Germany. And we coded the data against COVID in Belgium. As I mentioned, we do work a lot with telecom data. We use also satellite images, and our concept is always to be able to combine traditional with non-traditional data sources to be able to bring more relevance and let's say timeliness of the data for, again, development purposes. Here we worked with the Ministry of Health in Belgium and the 3 biggest telecom operators in Belgium that shared anonymized and aggregated data of their subscribers. And what we did basically, so as I mentioned before I explained about the telco data, you are able to look at population movements almost in real time and understand how many people move from A to B in a certain point of time. And what we did here in Belgium basically is looked at an average number of trips of people and whether the people basically respected lockdown measures, and how potentially they did, and how did that affect the rates of COVID. And here, we had basically what major events that happened, and we saw the impact of the different announcements on the population movements overall. So this is for all Belgium. And then basically we looked at whether those were impacted differently for long versus short-term trips, as well as how did that look like for rural versus urban populations. And finally, we were able,
Rosie,
and
1
here
minute,
the work,
please.
no problem, this is actually the end. What was really important is actually to work with epidemiologists and be able to identify where the risk is the highest based on what we see in the population data, in the population movement data, as well as the cases from COVID. And to conclude, we also did quite some surveys with the communitarian workers to understand what is actually their biggest challenge when it comes to data. And while we are all talking about AI, and it's really important, the power of AI and data is increasing, we are also realizing that for the development space, there are much bigger challenges to be solved, including, collecting and cleaning data, while actually everyone is interested in artificial intelligence, including in the communitarian space. So, solving for some of the basic ones like good data quality and digital literacy is something that we are also doing on day-to-day basis. Yeah, that's it for me. Thanks a lot for the opportunity again.
Many thanks.